Church family, from the time that it is ours to share together this Lord's Day with your prayers and the Holy Spirit's help, I'd like to preach Identity Part 4 from the title, Strategies for Survival. Strategies for survival. 100 hours. That's how long scientists say a human body can typically survive at average temperatures without water. Above average temperatures, the timeline for survival is cut nearly in half. Adding physical exertion in that time can be significantly cut to as little as 7 hours. Water and constant access to it is absolutely necessary for life and for living. In our text today, the children of Israel journeyed through the wilderness on the other side of Egypt on their way to the promised land, and yet again found themselves in a hard spot. The text that we just read says they were led as the Lord commanded from where we left them last week in the wilderness of sin to journey by stages from place to place, and they now are camped at Rephidim, where the text says there was no water. Church family, remember that this is the African desert. What we gather from the whole Exodus narrative, as far as timing is concerned, it probably would have been summertime. They would have been marching for many miles each day, carrying all of their belongings with them, herding their livestock, and with no water, all it would take for them to be taken out would not be an enemy's attack, would not be some ravaging disease, would not be some internal conflict. All it would take would be one average hot summer afternoon. Now, to keep it in context, this was not the first time the Israelites have found themselves in a tough situation. When we first encountered the Israelites in this series, they were in another tough situation. They were at the banks of the Red Sea with the sea on one end and Pharaoh and his army on the other. But the Lord delivered them out. Then they journeyed 3 days into the wilderness, and they came to a similar tough situation. They came to a place with water, but they couldn't drink because the water was bitter. The Lord led Moses to throw a piece of wood in the water, and the water miraculously became sweet so that they could drink and be satisfied. Last week we saw that they kept on journeying for 6 weeks, and they came to another tough situation. They found themselves in the wilderness of sin, and they had run out of food with no stop and shop in sight. The Lord rained down manna from heaven for them to eat. But now, as they have journeyed in stages, as they have gone from place to place at the Lord's command, they are now camped at Rephidim, but there's a problem there. There is no water at Rephidim. Now, what is the Lord up to with this? This doesn't make any sense. At least at Mara there was water. It may have been bitter, but at least they had it. The wilderness of sin, at least there was water. They might not have had food, and while they were hungry, they could have probably pressed their way a little further, or they maybe could have eaten some of their livestock. But now on their journey, going from place to place in stages as the Lord commanded them, they are now camped at Rephidim, a place where there is no water. This was by far the worst of their wilderness woes. You see, without water in a hot African desert during the summertime, they were sure to die. They may have been able to go without food. They may have been able to go without shelter. They may have been able to go without a lot of other creature comforts that we think are necessary for survival. But without any water around, there would be no faking the fun. Couldn't find a way just to make do. There would have literally been no way for them to survive. But isn't it interesting? We have seen this entire series that it's the Lord who commands and leads them to each place. Church family, I have to ask you a question here. Have you ever been led by the Lord? Have you ever been commanded to camp at Rephidim before? Have you ever found yourself, even after you prayed, in a place where there was no other opportunities and no other options? Have you ever found yourself in a place that could not sustain your survival, much less your flourishing? Have you ever found yourself in a space where it was so bad that it could only get better, but the only way it was going to get better was by a literal act of God? Beloved, the freedoms come in our journey with God. I'm not sure why God chooses this wilderness way by which to lead us, but they are sure to come. Freedoms are sure to come, whether they be geographic, physical, social, relational, spiritual, mental, or emotional, or really a combination of all of these. On this first Sunday in November in the year of our Lord 2018, there are plenty of freedoms and plenty of people camped at them. Church family, I must admit to you that when I read this text, I couldn't help but think about who has been named as the migrant caravan. People, human beings, fellow sisters and brothers made in God's image and fighting in the human struggle, fleeing from violence in their home countries, attempting to seek asylum here in these United States. Journeying through the wilderness that is Central America, who this week faced their own literal referendum as the governor of Veracruz backtracked on his promise to send buses to transport them to Mexico City, as Mexico City wasn't ready to receive 160 buses due to their own water shortage. When I read this text, church family, I couldn't help but think about folks up in Flint. We've gone now for 4 years without clean, safe water, which means that not only do people not have access to that which should be an abundant and free resource that is needed to sustain the very basic levels of life, that means that children still cannot bathe properly. And Lord have mercy, that even means that sinners can't be baptized. I read this text, church family, I can't help but think about all of the groups of people have been attacked, whose dignity has been assaulted, whose rights have been stripped, whose humanity has been murdered, whether by bullet, boardroom, or by the ballot in these past 2 years. Can't help but think about how, like these children of Israel, just within the first 3 months of their freedom from Egypt, things have changed for them so swiftly. Maybe it just is things have cycled through again so quickly. I read this text, church family, I can't help but think about how it seems like we have been camped at Refidum with no water for these past 2 years. Praying that somehow, some way, despite attempts to block the ballot from blacks and browns, things will change and get a little easier come Tuesday. I read this text, I can't help but think about so many things, so many people in this world, so many people, our community, so many people, even in our church, camped at their own Refidum, where there is no water, where there is no way out, just wilderness on every side, impossibility stacked upon impossibility. When I read this text, I could also hear the saints sing back in Nashville, Tennessee. An old song that says, God specializes in things impossible. And He will do what no other power can do. While there may be some things that I don't understand about this text, while there may be some things that I don't understand about why the Lord would command them and would command us to camps like a place called Refidum. One thing that I do know and what I want to share with you, what I want to remind all of us of this Lord's Day, is that God can still do the impossible. God still still has something even when you have nothing. God can still make ways where there is no way. Watch this. God can still make ways in the worst of our wildernesses where there is no water. So the question becomes, if then this is the kind of God that we serve, how do we trust God? How do we survive? What strategies do we need to adopt in order to survive the worst of our wilderness? Look at the text, child of God. If we are to witness the work of our God in our wildernesses where there is no water, we must first look to the Lord. And I know that this is not a novel point. I know that this is no fresh or new revelation for you, but this should be a serious reminder for all of us. Naturally, as we have seen over and over again throughout these past couple of weeks in this series, when these types of bad and tough situations arise, the Israelites do like we do and complain. Here in the text, we hear the complaining again. Verse 3 says, "But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, 'Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us, to kill our children, to kill our livestock with thirst?'" But look at how Moses responds in verse 4. In verse 4, verse 4 says, "So Moses cried out to the Lord." Notice here that when the people complained against Moses, who no doubt was thirsty himself, that Moses did not do what I suspect most of us would have done. When the people came to Moses complaining not to him, but about him, Moses didn't cuss them out. Moses didn't start complaining against them in retaliation. Even still, Moses didn't start complaining with them. And one more thing, Moses didn't ignore them either. But the text says that when the people complained, Moses cried. Moses cried out not to them, not before them, but to the Lord. And I think that this is a point that we need to revisit time and time again. Yes, something realistic needed to be done. Yes, they had some pressing needs. Yes, they were going to need water immediately. This point should not be lost that Moses, even in the worst of their wilderness situation, pauses to look to the Lord, to cry out to him even in a time of emergency. Sisters and brothers, anytime you attempt to solve pressing problems without prayer, you're only going to create more problems. Anytime you attempt to solve problems only with the best practices, you're still only going to create more problems. Simply, anytime you attempt to solve problems with at least first acknowledging the problem solved, you're going to have some problems. Imagine what would have happened if Moses, their leader, would have publicly exhibited that same type of behavior that the people were and joined them in their complaining instead of privately going before the Lord in prayer. Getting ahead of myself, but maybe, just maybe, if he opened his mouth to complain instead of opening his mouth to cry out, maybe he would not have heard the command of the Lord in the text that would have solved their problem. And everybody, including him, would have died, and the whole Exodus would have been for naught, and the promised land would have been forfeited, and their 3-month journey in the wilderness would have been wasted, all because of a rough 7-hour period. Notice that it wasn't enough just for Moses to pray once. Notice that it wasn't enough just for Moses to pray on the Sabbath day. Notice that it wasn't enough just for Moses to bookend his days with, "Lord, I thank you for this morning's rising, and now I lay me down to sleep." Notice that Moses cried out to the Lord. Moses looked to to the Lord in those moments, he took a minute and through prayer recollected himself. He quieted himself enough, he stilled his own thoughts and emotions enough, he put himself in a posture to be able to listen and hear clearly what the Lord's command would be so that they would survive. That's a word for somebody in the sanctuary tonight. Somebody just needs to look to the Lord. Stop taking it personally. Don't react personally, but respond prayerfully. Learn how to discipline yourself and quiet yourself for just a minute. Instead of joining the complainers, get to praying. So that you can hear from the Lord exactly what you need to do so that not only you can survive, but the people around you, the people who are connected to you, the people who are following you, the people who are depending on you can survive too. You'll be amazed, church family, at what taking just one moment, just taking 30 seconds, just taking 3 deep breaths will do for your judgment, for your peace, and for your clarity. Text says that when Moses cried out to the Lord, the very next thing that happened is what verse 5 says. The Lord said to Moses. The Lord answered his prayer and said, go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Church family, if we are to witness the work of our God in our wildernesses where there is no water, our strategies for survival must not only be to look to the Lord, but they also must include leaning on our leaders. God's answer to their water problem was for the people to stay where they were, without water, and for Moses, along with some of the elders of Israel, to keep moving, as the text says, to go ahead. God told Moses, leave the complainers where they are. Take some, not all, but some of the elders with you. Walk away from the camp. Walk away from her freedom. Step away from the people for a minute. But walk before them. Don't go out the back door. And walk toward hope. Don't miss the details in the text, child of God. Your deliverance is always in the details. That is, yes, sometimes you have to get away from a situation, but you can't go just by yourself. You have to take some of the elders with you. You have to take some people who are wise. You have to take some people who are workers. You have to take some people who can serve as witnesses to what God wants to do. Because going alone in a hot desert when the situation is this dire is deadly. There would need to be some people who went along with Moses. And look at the text. They couldn't just go off by themselves. They couldn't just sneak away. They couldn't just leave through the back door. They had to go through the front door. They had to pass before the people. They had to pass before the very people who were complaining against them. They had to pass before the very people who stood in dire need of water. Moses and the elders would follow the command of the Lord to go ahead to Horeb. The last thing they would see as they left were the people in need at Rephidim. This begs 2 points to me. One, that leaders from whom the solution will come aren't the ones who were in leadership in Egypt. It wasn't Pharaoh who was out there leading the people. It wasn't the taskmasters Pharaoh appointed leading the people. It was Moses, want to be sure, who was raised among them, who was familiar with the Egyptians and their ways. Leadership did not come from Egypt nor an Egyptian. Leadership came from a Hebrew Moses and from the Hebrew elders. People who have experienced some things and have some wisdom gained from their history, from their time in oppression. They would use to advise the leader in the present day to move toward a more hopeful future. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? That's one. But two is this, that real leaders will never walk away from the people without looking at the people. They won't walk away without letting the people look at them. They won't walk away without seeing the people and their needs and going off to do something for the people that meets their needs. Real leaders will always keep the people go ahead of the people, not to get away from the people, not to get over on the people, but to ultimately serve the people to come back with real solutions to their real problems. See, real leaders don't just show up during election season, never to be heard or seen again, never to be held accountable to the people. Real leaders don't just pass before the people to pay platitudes without giving any real progress on the people's problems. I know this is going to get me in trouble. I'm going to say it anyway. You're going to get in trouble, get in good trouble. That's what John Lewis said. I'm tired of politicians who want to voyeuristically prey on the people of God as they worship in our churches, who want to get up and stand behind pulpits and lie in the house of God, talking about how concerned they are about how they're going to solve all of our problems, want to get up, talk about how much they hate racism and poverty and all these other things, and one won't say the same thing to white churches, two won't remember what they said after election day, and three won't see them again until the next election. I'm sorry, I guess that's why they don't come to community. Church, we got to lean on our leaders. We've got to support our leaders. We've got to support the ones who are following the commands of the Lord like Moses, not the commands of Philippe. You've got to follow these leaders, whoever they may be, whether they're on the ballot, in the boardroom, at the bank, or even at the local bodega or barbershop. You've got to support the ones who are taking the elders along, who are heeding their wisdom and counsel, and who are about the business of passing before the people, remaining accountable to the people, always considering the people and coming back with progress, not for politicians, but for the people. If we are to witness the work of our God in our wildernesses where there is no water, strategies for survival must not only be to look to the Lord. Strategies for survival must not only be to lean on our leaders. But thirdly and finally, our strategies for survival must be to leverage the landscape. The text says at the end of verse 5 and in verse 6, take in your hand staff with which you struck the Nile and go. This is the Lord talking to Moses. He said, I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. So strike the rock. Water will come out of it so that the people may drink. The Lord told Moses to take a serious look at what was around him if he and the people were going to survive. God called his attention to what Moses had available to him in his landscape. First, God calls Moses' attention to his staff. Sunday school saints in the sanctuary will know, and again, Sunday school growth groups are every Sunday, 9 a.m. Amen. Sunday school saints in the sanctuary will know that the staff God is telling Moses to take with him is the same staff that Moses had in his hand when he met God back in Exodus chapter 4, verse 2. Sunday school saints in the sanctuary will know that the staff God is telling Moses to take with him is the same staff that Moses used to throw down and become a snake in Egypt. Sunday school saints in the sanctuary will know that the staff God is telling Moses to take in his hand with him is the same staff that Moses used to initiate the plagues of thunder, hail, fire, and wind. Sunday school saints in the sanctuary will know that the staff God is telling Moses to take with him is the same staff that Moses used to part the Red Sea, causing the very water to split, causing dry land to appear where there was ocean. The Israelites to cross over on dry land. Then for Pharaoh and his army to be drowned. Church family, something happens when God tells Moses to put his staff in his hand. It's an ordinary, everyday object that would have been used to help him walk and to help shepherd his sheep while he was a shepherd in the Midian. Something happens. God tells Moses to take this everyday object in his hand. Wait a minute with that, with the staff in his hand. Second, God called Moses' attention to the rock. And again, Sunday school saints in the sanctuary will also know that it is here at the foot of Mount Horeb where Moses had encountered God for the very first time at the burning bush. It was the very place where God first called Moses to initiate this whole exodus out of Egypt. It's the same spot where Moses asked another question of the Lord and said, if I come to the Israelites, the same people who he just had to pass before, and say to them that the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask of me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? This is the same spot where God said to Moses, tell them, I am who I am. There in that arid landscape, there at Rephidim, where there was no water in that landscape, with both a staff and the presence of the Savior, some miraculous things were bound to happen. Yes. Scripture says that Moses struck the rock. Struck the rock with the staff in the sight of the elders, and that's where the Lord said he would stand. There from the foot of Horeb back to the camp at Rephidim, water would then flow from that rock for them to drink. The lesson here is that even in the worst of our wildernesses, if we look to the Lord, if we lean on our leaders, and if we leverage our landscape, that which God has already provided for us, God will truly make a way where there is no way. Even in a place where it may feel like God has forsaken you. Their presence there at the foot of Mount Horeb lets them know that God is there. Even in a place where there is no life, where there is no water, God is there. Even in a place where it doesn't seem like it can get any worse, God is there. And since God is there, your peace is there. Since God is there, your power is there. Since God is there, provision is there. And since God is standing there, all you have to do is take what the Lord has given to you, stand before his presence, do what he tells you to do, and strike the rock. That's how we survive, church family. We go to the rock, for what's in the rock will save us. And since it's first Sunday, we might as well go and have some church. It's the rock where the children of Israel would go back time and time again. It was at the rock where they would worship. It was at the rock where they would find their safety. It was at the rock where they would find deliverance. That's why it says in Psalm 78, verse 35, and they remembered that God was their rock and the Most High their Redeemer. That's why they said in 2 Samuel 22, verse 32, that who is a rock besides our God?